The forest was silent that morning. The mist hung low between the tall pines of southern Germany, curling around the twisted wrecks of tanks and abandoned trucks like ghosts from a war that refused to die. American soldiers, exhausted and half-starved from days of fighting, moved cautiously down a narrow dirt track, rifles ready, boots crunching on frost. They were part of a reconnaissance unit, sweeping the region for retreating German troops. But what they found deep in those woods wasn't an enemy ambush. It was something else, something hidden for years. At first, they thought it was just an old rail yard, rusting tracks, half buried under leaves, leading to nowhere. But then they heard it, a low metallic groan, like something shifting in the distance. The soldiers followed the sound, weapons raised, until the fog thinned, and there it was, a train, a massive freight train, stretching into the trees, its black paint faded, its cars sealed shut. The insignia on its side was barely visible, a small black eagle clutching a swastika. The men exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't on any map. There shouldn't have been a railway here at all. And yet, here it was, untouched, hidden, almost waiting to be found. One soldier climbed up to the carriage and tugged at the heavy door. It wouldn't budge. Another joined in. Together, with a screech of rusted metal, the latch gave way. What they saw inside would later be described in official reports as beyond comprehension. But before that, before the world learned what was hidden in that train, the story begins much earlier, in the chaotic final month of the Second World War, when the Third Reich was collapsing and its secrets were being buried under fire and rubble. By early 1945, Nazi Germany was falling apart. Allied forces were advancing from the west, Soviet troops closing in from the east. Cities were in ruins, communication lines broken, and high-ranking officials were desperately trying to save what they could. Not just their lives, but the vast wealth and plunder they had taken across Europe. Gold, art, jewels, archives, even scientific research. The looted treasures of an entire continent were being moved, hidden, or destroyed. Rumors began circulating among Allied intelligence units about secret trains, armored convoys loaded with gold and valuables, sent to remote regions under SS guard. Some said they were heading for the Alps, to a supposed Nazi stronghold. Others whispered they were destined for neutral countries, carrying men and treasures meant to rebuild the Reich one day. Most dismissed it as wartime myth, but in reality, at least one of those trains existed, and it was moving to the forests of Lower Silesia under the personal orders of SS officials. In the dying weeks of Hitler's empire, the train's cargo had been assembled from across occupied Europe, priceless paintings from Paris and Warsaw, crates of gold from seized banks, and personal belongings stripped from concentration camp victims, all packed tightly into sealed freight cars, guarded by men sworn to secrecy. No official records, no manifests, no witnesses. As the Allies advanced, orders were given to move the train south, away from the front lines, deeper into the forested mountains near the Czech border. The engineers working on the railway were told it carried military equipment. None dared to ask questions. But in the small towns nearby, villagers noticed a train passing at night. No lights, no whistles, only the rumble of heavy wheels in the dark. And then, one night in April 1945, it vanished. Some said it was bombed. Others claimed it entered a tunnel and never came out. For decades, treasure hunters searched for it, calling it the Nazi gold train. But most assumed it was just another legend of the war, buried under rumor and time. Until, in the spring of 1945, a group of American soldiers stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to find. These soldiers belonged to the 90th Infantry Division, operating near the German-Czech border. Their mission was simple: sweep the forest for enemy units, secure supply routes, and locate any abandoned depots. But that morning, as they advanced through the dense woods, they noticed an old, overgrown railway track cutting through the underbrush. It wasn't on their maps, but curiosity and a soldier's instinct told them to follow it. The tracks curved deeper into the trees, twisting like a scar through the wilderness, until they reached a clearing. There, half hidden by foliage, stood the train. Dozens of cars, weathered but intact, as if time had stopped around it. At first, they assumed it was empty, a relic left behind by retreating Germans. But the more they looked, the stranger became. Every door was bolted from the outside. The cars were sealed with thick metal latches and wax insignia. The locomotive's boiler was cold, but fresh footprints marked the dirt around it. Someone had been there recently. The lieutenant ordered 2 men to check inside. They pried open the first carriage, expecting perhaps weapons or fuel or rations. Instead, the beam of their flashlight fell upon something glinting in the dark. A pile of gold bars, stacked neatly from floor to ceiling, stamped with the insignia of the Reichsbank. The soldiers froze. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one whispered, "My God!" Word spread quickly through the unit. More cars were opened. Inside, they found crates filled with silver, jewelry, fine art, sculptures wrapped in canvas, and even religious relics from cathedrals across Europe. But it wasn't just treasure they found. Some of the cargo was far darker. Documents, medical files, and evidence of human experiments carried out in camps. The discovery sent shockwaves through the Allied command. But to understand how that train came to be there, and why it was hidden so carefully, we have to go back to the Nazi bureaucracy itself, to the secret networks that managed the looting of Europe, and the men who orchestrated one of the largest thefts in human history. It all began with a simple idea that everything in the conquered territories belonged to the Reich. From the gold and banks to the paintings on museum walls, everything was fair game. The SS established a division called the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, or ERR, tasked with confiscating art and valuables for the Nazi elite. Museums in Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, and Warsaw were stripped bare. Private collections belonging to Jewish families vanished overnight. These stolen treasures were shipped to Germany, some to decorate the homes of Nazi leaders, others stored in salt mines and hidden depots. As the war turned against them, the Nazis began moving these items further inland to keep them out of Allied hands. And that's where the train came in, one final shipment, ordered when defeat was inevitable, a last desperate attempt to preserve the wealth of the Reich, or perhaps to buy freedom for those who still had something to trade. When those American troops found it, they didn't yet realize what they had uncovered. To them, it was just another strange mystery in a war full of them. But soon, their discovery would draw the attention of generals, intelligence officers, and even historians, all trying to piece together how so much stolen history ended up locked inside a forgotten train, deep in a silent forest. What the soldiers did next, and what was truly hidden inside those final carriages, would change the way the world remembered the fall of Nazi Germany. The first few hours after the train's discovery were chaos. The soldiers, still dazed by what they'd found, guarded the site as their officers radioed in the coordinates. Within hours, jeeps and trucks rolled into the forest clearing. The U.S. command didn't waste a second. They knew this could be one of the biggest finds of the war, maybe even bigger than the treasures uncovered in salt mines or castles. The site was sealed off under strict orders. No one in or out without clearance. Photographers arrived, snapping the eerie sight of gold bars stacked like bricks of light against the dark steel of the train. Armed guards stood at every corner. The men were forbidden from taking anything. Even touching the cargo without authorization could mean court-martial. But the soldiers couldn't help whispering among themselves about what else might be hidden in those locked cars further down the line. When they cracked open the next few carriages, the mystery deepened. Inside one, they found hundreds of paintings wrapped in linen. Masterpieces by Rembrandt, Raphael, and Van Eyck, many of them stolen from museums in occupied Europe. In another, wooden crates were filled with coins, chalices, and jewels from churches. And then they reached a carriage that chilled everyone to the bone. It wasn't gold. It wasn't art. It was evidence. Files, ledgers, and boxes of personal belongings. Eyeglasses, watches, wedding rings, thousands of them. The kind of items taken from people before they were sent to their deaths. There were even human remains sealed in small containers, likely used for experiments. The men fell silent. For the first time, they understood that this wasn't just a treasure train. It was a time capsule of horror, a final record of the Reich's crimes. Reports of the discovery reached Allied headquarters within a day. The U.S. Army's Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program, known as the Monuments Men, was immediately dispatched. These were historians, museum curators, and art experts turned soldiers. Their mission was to recover and protect Europe's cultural heritage from wartime destruction and theft. When they arrived at the forest site, they were stunned. Many of them had spent months chasing rumors of missing art, from the Louvre, from Polish castles, from Jewish families across Europe. And now, here it was in front of them, hidden inside rusting freight cars. They began cataloging everything meticulously, photographing, labeling, and documenting the origins of each piece. One officer described it later as walking through the ruins of civilization. But the deeper they dug, the stranger the story became. Some crates contained items no one could identify, sealed glass tubes, mechanical components, and scientific notes written in code. Allied intelligence agents suspected some of these belonged to secret weapons programs, possibly linked to nuclear or biological research. Others believed the train had carried not just treasure, but knowledge, data and prototypes the Nazis hoped to trade for safety when defeat was certain. Then there were the eyewitness accounts. Locals from nearby villages told American officers they had seen SS guards overseeing the loading of the train months earlier. They described convoys of trucks arriving at night, carrying crates under heavy guard. Some swore they saw high-ranking Nazi officials inspecting the operation. But the most haunting detail came from one elderly villager who claimed that when the train left the last station, dozens of forced laborers were locked inside the final carriages and never came out again. When investigators opened the last few sealed cars, the smell hit them first. Inside were skeletal remains, men and women who had likely been left there to die when the train was abandoned. No one could say why. Maybe they were witnesses, maybe prisoners used to load the treasure, or maybe they were simply left behind as the SS fled. Whatever the reason, it turned the discovery from a mystery into a tragedy. The American command quickly classified parts of the discovery. Officially, it was reported as a German treasure train containing cultural property and valuables. But some of what was found, especially the documents, was removed under strict secrecy and shipped to intelligence centers in France and the United States. Many files were never made public. Even so, the train's existence confirmed what historians had long suspected. The scale of Nazi looting was beyond imagination. Between 1939 and 1945, it's estimated that the regime stole over 5 million artworks, along with billions in gold, silver, and currency. The Reich's gold reserves were systematically stripped from banks, museums, and private homes across Europe. Some of that wealth was melted down and spent on the war. But a large portion, like what lay inside that forest train, was hidden, waiting for a future that never came. For the soldiers who found it, the discovery was surreal. Most were young men from small towns in America, farmers, teachers, mechanics. They had come to Europe to fight tyranny, and instead stumbled upon the very physical evidence of it. Some would later recall that moment as the first time they truly understood what they had been fighting for. The investigation into the train led to more astonishing finds. Following leads from documents inside the carriages, Allied teams uncovered other hidden caches: art stored in salt mines near Altaussee in Austria, gold bars buried under tunnels in Merkers, and priceless books stashed in Bavarian castles. Each discovery added another piece to the puzzle, showing how the Nazis had tried to scatter their stolen empire across secret locations, hoping to retrieve it one day. Interestingly, not everything in the forest train was of obvious value. Among the crates of gold and art were small, personal boxes labeled only with numbers. Inside were family photos, letters, children's toys, and religious artifacts, things with no monetary worth, but deep human meaning. These came from victims of concentration camps, their belongings confiscated before death. In those moments, the soldiers realized they weren't just cataloging treasure. They were documenting lives that had been erased. What happened to the train afterward is partly a matter of record and partly a mystery. The U.S. military transported much of the cargo to collection points in Frankfurt and Munich for cataloging. Items identified as belonging to specific nations were eventually returned. Poland, France, and the Netherlands received portions of their cultural property back in the following years. But other items vanished, either lost in bureaucracy, stolen, or quietly absorbed into private collections. Even today, some historians believe not all the train's cargo was ever reported. A few surviving soldiers spoke decades later of sealed cars that were taken away separately under guard by intelligence officers, cars that contained documents and technology rather than gold. Some say it was early research into radar, rocketry, or atomic energy. Others believe it was part of Operation Paperclip, the American program that secretly recruited Nazi scientists after the war. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. The discovery of that train deep in the forest was one of the most significant finds of the war's aftermath. It symbolized both the unimaginable greed and the utter collapse of a regime built on plunder and death. And yet, even with official reports, photographs, and testimonies, questions remain. Was it the only train? Could there still be others, hidden in tunnels, buried under mountains, sealed beneath decades of silence? Treasure hunters in Poland, Germany, and the Czech Republic have spent generations searching for them. Some claim to have found traces of sealed tunnels, buried rails, even radar anomalies suggesting entire trains underground. Governments have launched excavations, often finding nothing, but sometimes fragments of truth, rusted train parts, Nazi insignia, scattered coins. As one historian once said, the war didn't end with the gunfire. It ended with the secrets we still haven't uncovered. And among those secrets, the story of the forest train remains one of the most haunting, because behind the glitter of gold and the beauty of art lay something far darker, a reminder of what humanity can lose when greed and hatred take control. Night fell over the forest as the last soldiers packed up their equipment. The train, now half emptied, stood like a black serpent in the mist, its metal sides glinting faintly under the moonlight. Guards paced slowly between the cars, their boots crunching on the gravel, rifles slung low. Somewhere beyond the trees, the war was still raging. But here, in this forgotten corner of Germany, history had already changed. As dawn broke, the Americans began loading the treasure onto trucks. It would take days to move everything. Gold was stacked into military transports. The paintings were wrapped carefully, tagged, and cataloged. Each crate carried a story of a family, a nation, or a culture that had been stripped bare. But amid the orderly recovery, a strange unease hung in the air. One lieutenant later wrote that he felt like they were standing on the grave of something immense. It wasn't just the value of the cargo. It was a sense that this train was a tomb, a monument to the madness that had consumed Europe. When Allied intelligence officers arrived to inspect the more sensitive cargo, the atmosphere shifted again. Men in plain uniforms, speaking quietly, took over several cars and ordered the soldiers to keep clear. They spent hours examining documents, maps, and coded notes. At one point, they sealed 2 of the cars entirely and escorted them away under heavy guard. What was inside those cars was never made public. Some believe they contained Nazi research, experiments tied to secret weapons programs. Others think they held files about looted gold transferred through neutral banks, implicating officials far beyond Germany's borders. Official reports would later describe these materials simply as classified. And in a war filled with secrets, that word carried weight. For the soldiers, the forest train became a story they would tell quietly for years afterward. Some never spoke of it at all. They returned home, built families, lived ordinary lives. But in quiet moments, they could still see those gleaming stacks of gold, the empty shoes, the faded paintings staring out from the darkness of the carriages. In the months that followed, the Allies continued to uncover more hidden caches. In the Austrian salt mine of Altasee, they found thousands of masterpieces destined for Hitler's personal museum, the so-called Fuhrer Museum in Linz. In the Merkur salt mine, U.S. troops uncovered nearly 100 tons of gold bullion and millions in foreign currency. Each discovery added another chapter to the incredible saga of the Reich's stolen wealth. But none had quite the same haunting atmosphere as that forest train, because it was found by chance, not planned. It was a ghost from the past, waiting to be stumbled upon. When the war finally ended, the work of returning the treasures began. The monument's men, with limited staff and resources, tracked down owners, cataloged archives, and arranged shipments. Some artworks made their way back to the museums and cathedrals they had been stolen from. Others vanished into the chaos of post-war Europe. Many families never saw their heirlooms again. Years passed, and the legend of the hidden trains only grew. Rumors spread through towns in Poland and Germany. Stories of tunnels sealed with explosives, secret maps found in old SS files, even deathbed confessions of soldiers who claimed to have helped hide the gold. Treasure hunters, driven by greed or fascination, began scouring the countryside with metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar. In 2015, a team of explorers in Poland claimed they had located another Nazi gold train buried beneath the hills near Wałbrzych. Their announcement made international headlines. Excavation crews arrived, armed guards surrounded the site, and journalists swarmed the area. For weeks, the world held its breath. But when the digging was done, there was nothing. No train, no gold, only rocks and silence. Still, the myth refuses to die, because in every legend, there is always a sliver of truth. Historians believe that at least several trains like the one found by the Americans did exist, each carrying stolen wealth from the crumbling Reich. Some were destroyed in air raids, others hidden so well that even their builders didn't live long enough to reveal their locations. And then there are those that may still lie buried beneath the forests and mountains of Central Europe, sealed away by time, waiting. Yet, beyond the thrill of treasure, the real significance of discovery lies elsewhere. When the Americans opened those doors, they didn't just find gold. They found evidence of how far a regime would go to preserve an illusion of power. They uncovered the greed that fueled the war, the organized theft of entire cultures, and a cold efficiency with which humanity had been stripped away. Among the soldiers that day was a young sergeant from Ohio named Thomas Ellison. In his diary, found decades later by his family, he wrote one simple line: "It wasn't the gold that scared me. It was realizing how normal men can do this." That one sentence captures the true heart of the story, because the forest train wasn't just a discovery of stolen wealth. It was a mirror held up to civilization itself. Over the years, the train's contents were divided among recovery centers, and much of it was eventually returned. But some of the documents taken by intelligence agencies became part of a different story: the Cold War. Technology, data, and research retrieved from Nazi archives would quietly shape early American and Soviet scientific programs. The world moved on, but the echoes of that train reached further than anyone could have imagined. Today, deep in that same forest, the tracks are gone. Only fragments remain: rusted bolts, pieces of rail swallowed by moss. The ground where the train once stood has been reclaimed by nature. Birds nest in the trees, and sunlight filters through branches on a soil that once had unimaginable secrets. Yet, locals still tell the story. They speak of the day when the Americans came and unearthed the past. Some say that when the mist is heavy and the forest is quiet, you can still hear the faint echo of a train whistle, a ghostly sound carried by the wind. It's a chilling reminder that history never stays buried. The legacy of the Nazi gold trains isn't about treasure hunts or lost riches. It's about memory, about confronting what was taken, not just in gold or art, but in lives, culture, and innocence. The discovery in that forest forced the world to look directly at the human cost of greed and war. And perhaps that's why, decades later, the image of that abandoned train still captures imagination. It represents something bigger than gold. It represents a moment when silence broke, when the forest gave up one of history's darkest secrets. In the end, the Americans who stumbled upon it didn't realize they were making history. They were just following a set of tracks through the woods. But with every step, they were walking into one of the most astonishing discoveries of the 20th century. And when the final door creaked open and the light fell upon gold, bones, and stolen art, the world was forced to remember what the war had truly been about. Not victory, not power, but the desperate attempt to hold on to a dream built on theft, fear, and lies. The forest train remains a symbol of greed, of loss, and of truth hidden in the shadows. And though time has erased its tracks, the story continues to echo, like that whisper still in the distance, calling out from the past, reminding us that no matter how deeply you try to bury history, it always finds a way back to the surface.